On July 20th, 1996, the world woke up to the news of the United States' ascension to the moon, specifically the three astronauts who launched on the Apollo 11 mission: Buzz, Michael Collins, and Neil Armstrong. The topic caused a very big uproar in the world at the time, and America was on the throne in the field of space, especially since after the Apollo. Despite all the scientific progress we are experiencing today, no one has returned to the moon again, although technology and equipment today certainly make the task much easier than in the past. Welcome to the Flashy First Facts channel. But before we start, if you are still new to the channel, please subscribe and activate the bell to receive the new videos. In order to understand that there have been no human missions launched to the moon since the year 1972, we need to know the first. Why did the Americans decide to sleep in the first place? Red traveled the first time. Is it for scientific research and to benefit people, for example? In fact, the main motive that made America seek to send humans to the moon was to prove its superiority over the Soviet Union, the oldest of the entire world. After World War II ended, all parties emerged completely exhausted from the war, and of course the economic situation was completely exhausted, with the exception of only two countries, America and the Soviet Union. And that's why we were working on these two all the time, knowing that he would have absolute sovereignty and domination over the world. Given that the two were originally on each other's side during the World War, and the two were among the Allied countries and had treaties and agreements between them, it would have been of no use for them to enter into a military clash with each other. That is why the idea of the Cold War appeared, which is that each country proves that it is superior in all fields to the other country. One of these areas was the space race. In October of the year 1957 AD, the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik 1 satellite and made it orbit around the Earth in low orbit for about 3 months. This was the first satellite in the history of mankind, and it was a very huge event in which it proved the Soviets are technologically superior to the entire world. 1 month after the launch of this satellite, in November of the same year, he put a dog named Leak in a spacecraft, and he also made this spacecraft orbit around the Earth, and he put sensors with it to measure the dog's heartbeat, blood pressure, and other things. The goal of this topic was to know the effect of the space environment on living creatures. That's it. We saved the people. In the year 1959, he sent a robotic spacecraft called Luna Sri and made it photograph the far side of the moon. It was astonishing that from Earth we always see only one side of the moon in an astronomical phenomenon called Itai-da Hawking. After about 2 years, specifically in April of the year 1961, the Soviets put a person inside a spacecraft, the pilot Yuri Gagarin, and they also made him orbit around the Earth for about a period of time in order to remain first. A human being sent into space in human history. Yes, America had some achievements in space, and it ended up like they launched some satellites and sent a chimpanzee or a shuttle and made it orbit the Earth. But the general scene was clear of the overwhelming superiority of the Soviet Union. America's position was very weak, and it had to do something to strike a strong position. The achievements that the Soviets made coincided with the beginning of a new presidential term for US President John Kennedy. A man was holding money for months, and he didn't look very nice. The people of blood remained the world, especially since Kennedy at that time was already causing America embarrassment and blood. When the Soviets issued a decision to invade Cuba in order to support the opposition there against the communists, the operation failed completely, and that is why Kennedy and the Americans needed something strong to restore their self-confidence and the people's confidence in them. This is what made Kennedy say in the famous speech on September 12, 1962.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
He asked the government to support NASA with all the money and equipment that NASA needs in order to... They achieved this goal before the year 1970 AD. Here is the horse's stud. The Apollo mission was life or death for the Americans, and they saw that it was needed. I went to them in education, and because of this, they achieved this goal at any cost. no matter how much money they spent, and they were prepared to endure difficult economic conditions, but the project succeeded. The Apollo mission was literally America's national project. For this reason, if one looked at NASA's budget in the year 1965, it was 4.3% of the total US federal budget, which is considered a huge number during the Apollo mission, and it would still have the equivalent of $264 billion of today's money available. All of this, of course, is in addition to political, governmental, and media support, but Regita's all-important statement is that no one will bring the matter up again. First, NASA's budget represents about 0.5% of the total American budget. This means that NASA's budget in the 1960s was 9 times greater than its current budget, and this is a number that is not enough to conduct safe missions to the moon. And put a line under the word safety so that I can refer to it, as we said. At the same time, the United States of America has proven its dominance over the space sky for a long time, and the issue has been decided in its favor, especially since the Soviet Union, which was their fierce competitor, was basically dismantled in the year 1991, and therefore the Americans have nothing to do with it. They spend huge amounts of money once again to make this happen. I thought, who could spend much smaller amounts and also achieve great achievements? I mean, you can imagine that the Apollo mission we talked about cost more than $264 billion in today's money, while the James Webb telescope, which was launched a few months ago and made a tremendous noise in the world, cost $10 billion, and I wish 10 countries, even America, would pay for it alone. This project has a partnership with 14 countries, including Austria, Belgium, Canada, Germany, and Britain. From a purely economic point of view, we are sending humans to the moon again, which is not our sole concern. Here, let us clarify an important point, which is that the rate of sending humans to the moon is completely different from sending machines in the year 1972, and to date, flights carrying machines to the moon have not stopped. Every few years, a country comes out and installs nail machines that are there in the year 2007. For example, Japan launched the Selene space probe, and a year later, in the year 2008, India launched the Chandra-1 spacecraft. 5 years later, in the year 2013, China sent the Shaanxi spacecraft, which successfully landed on the surface of the moon. And 5 years later, in the year 2018, they launched the Chang'e-4 spacecraft, and 2 years later, in the year 2020, they launched the Chang'e-5 spacecraft, which was estimated to take samples of stones and soil. She bought the order and returned with them, and this means that the trips did not stop completely, and there was no need for them to stop. However, trips that carry people are relatively easy and have many risks. Unlike trips that carry people, they are covered with rice and a very great effort in order to provide very precise safety precautions, such as maintaining the temperature inside the vehicle, maintaining the pressure inside the vehicle, and protecting humans from radiation, providing an amount of oxygen, and providing the necessary food and water for the duration of the flight, no matter how long it takes. All of these things are very complicated in the flight if it removes humans. Indeed, simply disposing of the astronauts' waste inside the vehicle is a complicated matter within. After all these precautions, it is possible that the missile that was originally shown to them will explode, or that the vehicle will have a malfunction while it is in space, and instead of the mission remaining a political victory for the state that carries it out, it will remain a calamity and a huge scandal. Of course, this is not the people who die, and this actually happened in the year 1970 on the Apollo 13 mission. The spacecraft's oxygen tank exploded, and there was a problem with the electricity generator. The 3 astronauts who were inside it were at risk of death, and that is why, after the spacecraft did not reach the moon's orbit, the mission was covered. They landed there and returned to Earth again, and made a landing in the Pacific Ocean. It was a very big event at that time. I may have a special episode for you about the topic if you want to write it in the comments. Finally, there remains an important thing, which is that all space agencies currently have a different strategic thought than in the past. Space agencies now see that all the money spent on the Apollo mission during the single flight was an irrational use of money and technology, or in other words, this money could have been used in a better way. Those responsible for the Apollo missions, instead of spending all this money to produce humans, could have built a complete system that would allow humans to be transported into space in a manner similar to means of transportation. This means that there will be a station on Earth and a station in space, and there will be rocket vehicles that have the ability to travel and return more than once. With the huge money that was spent on the Apollo project, it was possible to create a good system. But of course, no one thought about that because all their job was to win the Soviet Union. As quickly as possible, but this is only space agencies, as well as private companies like SpaceX, which are trying to build vehicles that can enable humans to go into space and encourage them again, repeatedly and sustainably. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with your friends. See you next time.